I'm Dr. Jessie Creamean. I'm a research scientist at Colorado State University, and I work mostly in the Arctic and Antarctic regions studying tiny specks of material in the air called aerosol particles and how those interact with clouds. So the expedition was hosted by the University of Stockholm, and it was called the ARTofMELT expedition. And it was on this about 300-foot long ship called the Odin. And the goal of the expedition overall was to bring scientists together, mostly from the atmosphere side of research, to look at these storms that come into the Arctic during May and June, when the Arctic starts to transition from winter into the summer melt season. And so these storms are really important this time of year because they bring a bunch of warm air and particles called aerosols from the lower latitudes. And what happens is those storms can actually help trigger some of the ice melt happening from the sea ice. And so that's what we were going to study. We think that these storms could be really important for starting to basically kick off the melting of the sea ice for the summertime period. We went up with a group of about 40 of us scientists on the ship, and the ship left from Svalbard, and it sailed and broke through sea ice to get between about Greenland and Svalbard. So just on off of the northern coast of Greenland, in the open ocean. Our particular project was looking at, so I mentioned aerosols. And so these can be things like dust, sea spray that comes from the ocean. We can have different types of microbes that are in the air, and then pollution from people. And so our project was focused on special types of aerosols that help clouds form. They basically seed the formation of clouds. So if you think of a cloud kind of like a tree or a plant, it needs these little initial seeds to grow on, and of course, water vapor. But that's what we were basically there to study, is where these things come from in the Arctic. Are they being transported from lower latitudes during these storms? And how do they actually affect clouds? It's actually pretty comfortable. You would think, being so far away from land and far away from internet, we can't get cell phone service up there. I mean, we're pretty far removed from most of the normal world, but we're in a really good group of people. So our group got along really well. We all worked together really hard to collect the data and the samples that we needed. And life on the ship's actually pretty nice. It's a big ship, so you stay in basically a bunk room with 1 to 3 other people, and you definitely climb a lot of stairs. There's a lot of stairs in different levels of the ship. There's laboratory spaces. You're working on deck often, and then there's our rooms that we live in and sleep in. Well, most of the time we're out working. Or there's a big dining area and a kitchen. There's a lounge area where we can go play games and kind of relax after a hard day of work out on the sea ice or on the ship. Let's see, what else? We get food. It was pretty good food on the ship, actually. So because it's a Swedish vessel, we had a lot of traditional Swedish food, and it was actually really, really good. So we were fed pretty well. We were pretty busy with our project. We had instruments that were on the ship collecting different types of data from the air, but most of our time was actually spent on the sea ice. So we would actually take a small team of us, and we would take a helicopter actually to go fly out to different stations on the sea ice. And so this would take up a whole day. We would basically gather all of our gear and equipment, load the helicopter. The helicopter would fly out to a specific location that I would pick out on the sea ice. And basically we wanted to be by open water. So we would look for these huge cracks in the sea ice and openings where there's exposed water. And that's where we would set up our stations. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to look at emissions of different things, like from the biology in the ocean coming up into the air from waves and bubbles. And so we would go out on the ice, we would take ice cores, we would take air samples, snow samples, seawater samples, you name it, we collected it out there. And then after a few hours, we would pack everything up and head back to the ship. So that was pretty much what most of what we did in terms of sampling. And then we also had a lot of lab analysis that we did after. So some of the samples we were able to analyze on the ship. And so that was kind of like the latter part of the day, as we would go collect these samples and then do the scientific analysis afterwards.